Welcome to the Make Space for Growth podcast. My name is Sara Vicente Barreto, and I'm your host. I'm a corporate strategist, problem solver, social entrepreneur, writer, mom of two, and passionate for growth, at home, in business, or in my community. This is season 2 of the Make Space for Growth podcast, a moment of lift. As we approach the end of the season and this year, I can't help but wonder at all the amazing women I have had the privilege to interview through the podcast. No doubt this pandemic has brought us many challenges, but it has also showed us how to take this journey forward with hope about what lies ahead. Around the world, we are rising to the challenges. We lift our souls to believe. We lift our minds from the fear. We lift our lives from the dark times that we want to leave behind. This is our moment of lift as we get out of this crisis stronger and together. In the podcast, I do love to hear about business, and I also love to meet the person behind it and hear about the moment when we find ourselves as we choose to effect change, the moment of turning around and choosing to move forward and facing lives fearless and joyful. Join me for this journey to find out how, because it is time for hope and light. Joining me today, I have Zeze Oriaikhi-Sao. Zeze is an entrepreneur, beauty and cosmetics industry expert, luxury brand consultant, influential speaker, podcast host, freelance columnist, and social media personality. She's also the founder and managing director of Malay, Africa's first global luxury fragrance and body care brand. Born in Nigeria and raised in the UK, Zeze developed a love of travel early in life. Inspired by her mother, a devoted entrepreneur, she transformed her passion for the people, natural beauty, and healing rituals of her home continent into Malay. Best of all, let's hear from her in the first person. So, Zeze, welcome to the Make Space for Growth podcast.
Wow, thank you so much for having me.
So before we talk business, may I ask you, what was your favorite thing to do as a child, and what did you want to be when you grew up?
Goodness, I loved all forms of play, and it's interesting because my daughter is the exact same way. She could literally play her life away. But I think I loved swimming so much. I felt so connected to the water. I think I could swim for the whole day and just keep swimming. So swimming, one. I wanted to be a teacher at one point. I think I felt a need to teach. Why? I don't know, because I would get my neighbors' kids who are younger than me, and I would sit them down in a classroom and teach them, literally. And then I would have the ruler on the board pointing. And then I went through a phase where I wanted to be a musician. I got obsessed with Tina Turner, and so I had a moment where I wanted to be a musician. I went through so many phases, but if I had to pick the first that I remember, teaching and swimming.
Yeah, and I think, in a way, you did go into the teaching route, but maybe without the ruler.
Yeah, I didn't have the ruler. It's PowerPoint now. And the clicker.
Exactly. So, Zeze, I gave a small intro about you, but, any story is best told in the first person. So I wanted to start maybe by something that is right at the beginning, or at least at the beginning of this phase of your life, which is you started a business shortly after finishing school, your company, Malay Natural Science. And I think it's less common that we have people in the podcast that go straight and do that, so early in their careers. We've had converted people, we've had people that dipped in and out, but this was early. So can you talk a little bit about the early days, how you've thought of setting this up, and perhaps a little insight into how that was in the beginning?
Cool, I can do that. First of all, it wasn't considered, even though it sounds considered. I had just finished business school. I met my then boyfriend, husband at the time, and then it was the height of the recession. So all of those things put together, and then he got a transfer with his job to move to South Africa at the time. Putting all of those events together meant that I moved to South Africa in the middle of a recession where there were hiring freezes. I was living with a boyfriend in a third world country, which was not going down very well with my parents at the time, because I seemed to just be living on a whim, after spending all this money on an education. And there I was living in a third world country, unemployed. And so I think as a result of that, it gave me time to do some traveling on the continent. It also gave me time to look at what else I could do in the meantime until the market sort of came back to life and regained momentum. And to be fair, that is how the business began, there wasn't, I think for most people, and at the time I would say true for me, I had this aspiration to really do something, but I didn't know how I would begin. I didn't know where you would start. And that aspiration I didn't think would happen in my early 20s. I honestly thought it was something that I would do, well into my 40s, once I've had a successful career. I've got enough money in the bank to really just take a risk and, follow my passions and my dreams, because then you're afforded the opportunity. Unfortunately, it didn't work out that way for me. And fortunately, I'm glad that it actually worked out the way that it has, because I came from a household where, my dad worked, in the same job for 46 years, built a career in the same company he started with from university till the end. My mum was the serial entrepreneur with, lots of businesses over the years. And so my perception of both of their careers was very much influenced by seeing, my dad with a stable job, stable income, and that gave us a ton of perks. We got to live in different countries, we got to travel, we lived, an expat lifestyle for most of my growing years. And then looking at my mum's business, which, was really exciting, stressful, but at times she would do these bold, out of the world projects. And I remember seeing both, being drawn to both, but for two different reasons. And so I never shut out the idea in the longer term of going out and starting my own thing. But it was something I was going to do after I'd gotten all the good stuff out the way, the stable job and, the pension and all of the stuff that, adults do. And the early days weren't as considered, even though, yes, I had a business plan. I did all of the academic stuff that comes with starting a venture. My mind wasn't 100% sure that this was going to be my career, because it was, in the meantime, in this stopgap while I'm figuring it out, I might as well do this, because when else would I have this opportunity? So that was how I saw it at the time. I then took that experience and went into a job, actually. So I worked for an investment group for a few months. And then I remember getting the call from CNN. And I remember that day vividly, because I was sat on my bed, working away at Malay. I was off of my normal job that day. And I get this call, and I think it's a friend playing a prank on me, because here I am, saying that I'm making creams for a living, where all my friends are in like banks and magic circle firms, and I'm just hanging out on my bed. And I remember thinking it was a prank, hung up the phone, sort of talked the talk while I was on the phone, because I was going with it, right? If I really knew it was a real conversation, I probably would have stuttered my way through. But because I thought it wasn't real, I was sort of playing along, as it were. And I remember ending that call, going into my job the next day and saying to one of my friends at work at the time, he's now passed away, and saying to him, after I'd realized it was real, that I've got this call, and is this a sign? And, how can I actually really live up to this version of what I'm going to present if I'm still working, a full-time job? And he said something which stuck with me, which was, what's the worst that can happen? If it doesn't work out, you just come back and get a job. And I think that stuck with me and continues to stick with me, actually, through some of the challenging times in my now 12-year career as an entrepreneur, which is, what's the worst that can actually happen? You embark on this dream, it doesn't work out, and you can still always get a job, because you're upskilling along the way, right? You're doing some great work that's opening so many doors. And I'm grateful for, goodness, all the experiences I've had just having started my meantime career that is now, I can own it as my career now.
So you've started a little bit unconventional and almost unintentional, but
yes.
You've come a long way, and I am always very curious about how business models grow over time. So Mali has certainly evolved in the 12 years that you've been involved in since that CNN call. You're now in 9 countries. You have more than 50 products. Can you tell us a little bit about, well, maybe even what the original idea was, how it started, and which phases do you see that you've gone through, including your international expansion?
So I feel like in the beginning, my idea was to create an experience, but I was never going into retail. That was my first business plan, was never retail. I was going to have a B2B business, which allowed me to create these amazing products, and I could do all these fun projects along the way. As time went on, I think, and this is one of my bigger lessons actually, was I stepped away from my own vision of how I felt I wanted to be in this business and in this lifestyle. And so I opened a retail store, I invested in a manufacturing facility, and I was working 7 days a week. I didn't wake up looking at my business and loving it anymore. There was nothing about it that was exciting, because at that point I was working to pay my staff. I was working to keep the business going. I wasn't working for the things that I started working for. And I found that once the joy started to wane, I started to make less money. It was the craziest thing. And at that point, my sister paid for a consultant to come in and have a look at my business model and my business plan at the time. And we looked at what I started off with, where I was, and just looked at the market as a whole, and whether or not, as I had developed the business to that point, the model that I was in at that point was a sustainable one. With me being one person, yes, I have teams of people, but the business will take 33% less if I wasn't there. And there was something wrong with that, because how do you scale a business based on you being such a huge contributor to the revenue? And I remember sort of them coming to the end of the project, because at the time she was doing an MBA. And so luckily I got the help of free consultants, really clever ones too. And they were like executive MBAs. So, one of them, was working in a bank, and they were all super corporate. And so it was nice to have that input into the business at the time. And so once that conversation started to escalate in the, hold on, this model that you've got isn't necessarily sustainable, because one, you're one person, two, how long can you work this hard for? And three, what's the scale potential of this if you needed to open another retail store in another country? What does that schedule look like for you? And so that was the first time. This was in 2013. So this was now 4 years into my journey, and we were growing, but I was dying, because I was overworked. I was losing sort of the passion for the business and what I was creating, because it was now starting to feel like it was bigger than me. And I was treading water, because now I'm like, okay, I'm losing 33% here. So I'm going to turn up there. But then something else would fall to the wayside. Till today, we all struggle with that. And I struggle with it, because in the 12 years of running Malay, there's also been, my growth and development as a career professional entrepreneur, whether that's speaking or guest lecturing or any of the other stuff that I do that give me joy. So I think from that process, I learned that I needed to find within the work, because sometimes people think about entrepreneurship as this huge passion project and there's nothing else to it. It is my work, and I needed to find ways of bringing in my joy, bringing in more of the things that I was evolving into my work. And so we then got involved with Ripple reading, and it became less about what was on paper, what you should do, and more about what I needed to continue to be at the helm of this ship. And I would say that's one of the earlier big lessons that came to me, because I ended up with spasms in my back and I couldn't get out of bed, and I had to call a doctor in. And I remember crawling to sort of get to the front door on all fours, because that's how much pain I was in, and opening the door and thinking, this isn't life, like I'm here. And all I was thinking while I was supposed to be recovering was, oh my God, I have this to do and I have that to do, and what's going to happen here? And just realizing that actually my model was just not sustainable. I couldn't build a large scale business the way that I had started. It just wasn't possible. And I was paying the price for it, and also living the nightmare of it, being that you're out of work. And actually, my business for that period of time sort of not stopped that it couldn't keep growing, but stopped because I wasn't injecting into it as much as I was. And so I came out of that re-looking and actually going back to my first vision of how I wanted the business to go and at what pace and how I wanted it to be more organic. And I didn't necessarily want to raise so much outside funding because I also wanted the freedom to do more things within the business and have the autonomy to make certain decisions, creative decisions. And so I would say the evolution has come from those experiences, and also lots of failures too. Realizing that retail is a beast in itself. Direct to consumer, and in the way, and that in the last 5 years has evolved. In the last 12 months alone, just due to the pandemic, retail is completely different. I did travel retail, so I was on the duty free in the airlines, and no one was flying anywhere. My business was largely 80% of my revenue is based on the hospitality industry. We went 20 something odd month with no real hotels open in sub-Saharan Africa because there was no travel. And so
it's funny because you've already started going into the topic I was going to cover, which is like what happened, because you've been through this transformation. You had the business in a certain place, which was more aligned with yourself, right?
Yes.
And then suddenly you get hit by this thing called COVID,
the pandemic,
and you can't sell in airlines, you can't sell in hotels. And so I always like to ask the question in two ways is, well, one, what were the obvious adjustments? But two, actually what came out of it that you wouldn't have done and it was better?
So obvious adjustments were accepting that there was no work in the traditional sense, right? There were no customers to sell to because all of my customers, which would be, the hotels, the retailers, the airlines, didn't have the business to sell to them. So that was the first obvious sort of slap in the face, which was the highlight there was I had a huge runway, having sort of had a decade behind me in business and being quite frugal because, you're broke for a really long time when you start a business, a really, really long time. And then once that starts to turn and you start making money, I was one of those people that I just wanted to see the money. I just wanted to see it in the bank account and know that it was there. It took me...
It's good that you didn't go spend it.
Yeah, it took me, without a lie. I didn't sort of grow my team ridiculously or anything. I was just comfortable seeing the money come in and nurturing the clients we had to see what the potential of growing our existing client base was instead of spending to get some more. But it took me, I want to say, just under 2 years before I called the bank. And I said, hey, I've got all this money sitting and I'm sure it's sitting in the wrong kind of account. Surely I can be earning some sort of interest here or something. I was in that sort of mindset of struggling entrepreneur for so long that when I came out of being a struggling entrepreneur, like I was still one in my head, even though my bank account said otherwise. And I remember that conversation with the banker that day, and he goes, like, why have you waited this long? And I said, because I didn't know what I was supposed to do. Like, I don't have a banking career behind me to know that, these are the steps.
Question, why he hadn't called you before.
Exactly. But I think, what was funny is they had tried reaching out to me, but I just didn't know what I would be talking about. Because, you go so long not having conversations with your banker when you have no money. Like, actually, you don't want to hear from the bank. That's the worst kind of situation. Right? And all of a sudden, the bank needs to chat to you and you're going, what's going on here? And so, having restructured, so going into COVID, I had a runway. So for the first 6 months, I was comfortable because I thought, this is great. It's time for actually me and my team to spend some time cleaning house, doing some of the things that we haven't had time to do, sit down, re-strategize, look at our expenses, see where we are actually throwing money away, operationally just getting fit, right? Because once post-pandemic, we need to come out with, hey, how do we stretch our margin even more? Because we're going to need to recover. we can't necessarily pass on a lot of that heat onto our clients, because our clients, unfortunately, they themselves are struggling. So how do we sort of trim the fat on our end so that we're retaining as much of a margin as possible? Luckily, we increased our prices in the February, and I do a 2-year price lock on sort of like our business clients, just because it gives everybody some room, right, to kind of grow into the next 2 years of a price increase. Given that I deal in commodities, that's just been a model that I've always employed. I find it gives, the clients some level of comfort, and it allows us as a business to kind of shock them a little less and retain them, because we have an idea of how their business is growing over a 2-year period and what they can withstand and what we can withstand over that period. And so to kind of hit the nail on your question, what changed was that 6 months became, near enough 2 years. And so 6 months was cool. I wasn't panicking. We came out of pandemic just at the point where I was now like, oh my God, we're back to watching our cash flow, which was not something we had experienced in a good few years as a business. I had to let go of any non-essential staff. Got a smaller office in South Africa, gave up our office in the UK. So took a lot of cuts in personnel and in expenditure to keep stretching that runway. As with a lot of businesses, some of the huge businesses that we thought were thriving didn't survive that time period just because they had nowhere else to go. And so luckily, as a business, we had some extra stretch, even though it didn't feel like we had any stretch. I would say 12 months in, it was like, oh, this is not good. 18 months in, it's like, okay, panic, everyone, panic.
Now you can.
Panic now. It gave me time to start to look at how do we pandemic proof ourselves moving forward? How can we start to diversify more even our business? So taking away the B2B side of the business and starting to look at, okay, maybe not retail in the traditional brick and mortar way, but can we really start to build a digital relationship with our customer base that would help us navigate, the next few years? Because the consumer has also changed in how they want to interact with the product. My first model was in my mind ingenious. What's the quickest way to get products in people's hands? Everyone stays in a hotel, everyone showers. What's the quickest way to get a conversion? They use it, they like it, they want to buy it. It's one of the fastest conversion methods
It's right there.
ever made, right? It's super easy. And didn't come with a huge marketing cost, because the marketing was done for you by being in a beautiful setting and people having a once in a lifetime experience that was special and magical for them. And how do I take that and create something that then starts to speak to the consumer? So that came out of that process. The learnings were, when you have it, be a hedgehog, keep as much of it as you, and part of it was also to save for some project, like converting a lot of the products we have in sub-Saharan Africa to allow them to be sold in the UK, the US, the EU, and other countries. Regulations changed, so there was a lot of some of that money that was kind of ear-pegged for some projects releasing new products. But those things have now sort of, been pushed back because we were more concerned with staying alive, keeping the business, keeping as much of our staff, and being ready to service our clients whenever they were ready to get going. Post-pandemic, I think humbling experience would be the right word to describe it.
So you've pandemic proofed yourself in a way, or tried to work towards that, and you've survived, which many businesses didn't necessarily do. As you look forward, it's a moment of lift that we're trying to have here. What opportunities do you see ahead? What's in the cards for Malay?
Goodness, I think diversifying our product offering is one. So we're going to go into apparel, which isn't something we've ever done before. And again, back to the original vision of creating a lifestyle brand and not necessarily just a cosmetic or beauty brand. So getting into that, being a lot bolder with expansion. I think I've always erred on the side of caution, and starting to push ourselves beyond our comfort zone, because we're in a lovely niche and it's safe and it's a lovely bubble, and we make a good living out of that. But now starting to really balls to the wall, push ourselves out of our comfort zone, go out there and find the talent that would help push the business. In some of my briefs with some of the digital consultants and the interviews that I'm having with them at the moment, it's usually help push us into the new decade, because I think we're still stuck in
We're in 19.
like 2009 or 2009 2010, to really push the business into this new millennium, or millennia or Gen Z type operating marketplace, because we've sort of done what we've done for so long, and we've established ourselves in that space, and have some great partnerships. We've worked with Harvey Nichols, we've worked with the Hut Group, we've worked with real stakeholders across hospitality, travel, retail, but not really spent time building that direct relationship with our customer. And I'm excited about doing that, and excited about extending ourselves into that space to really create something that is sustainable in the longer term.
So I think I'm probably going to ask you the most difficult question yet, though I can promise it's the only difficult one, because you've already told me a story of a lot of challenges along the way.
Yeah.
What would you say, looking back, was the biggest challenge you've had?
Oh, I think every entrepreneur continues to have this challenge, no matter what stage you're at, which is to fundraise or not to fundraise. And fundraising in itself is a job, right? And finding the right people to even help you execute that in itself, it takes some doing. And some people are great fundraisers, but bad business owners, vice versa. I think I was having this conversation with my sister, and actually COVID allowed me a lot of time to reflect on the trajectory of the business and how long I've had the business, and where I could be, where I can be, where I am. How do I achieve that? And what's important to me around growth and sustainability of that in effect. And I remember thinking, there were lots of people who were able to raise a lot of money in their careers and in their businesses. And we saw this happen, right? In the media, but those businesses don't exist today. It's the fine balance around how much organic should you be doing, and focusing on really turning £1 into 2, or £1 into 3, or £1 into 4, versus, the headline grabbing stuff that we all see. And when you look at the balance sheet of a lot of these, especially in my industry, and largely of a lot of these sort of headline grabbing businesses, they're carrying a huge amount of debt. And the pandemic showed us that model in itself is not pandemic proof. And so I guess reading between the lines of that message is, how much of the norm in the marketplace do you own, versus you sticking to your vision, staying in your lane? How much of staying in your lane should you do, and how much looking outside to inspire or to challenge should there be? And it comes in the form of mindset, sometimes comes in the form of, oh, should I then be fundraising, because then I can really grow this fast? But then fundraising comes with its pitfalls, right? Because then you're taking on or growing a much larger business than sometimes even you can handle, or the business is poised to handle, and then you're playing catch up. And so I would say, those are two challenges in two different ways, but those would be the two things that I would pose.
And you just said that you've had a bit of time to reflect on your journey. So what would you say are the characteristics that most define you as CEO, leader, however you want to call it, in your company?
I think for the first time, I allowed myself to step away from the business. I didn't try to tread water. So I basically said, there's no work, right? In the traditional sense of doing 200 things at the same time. This is manageable work. I run a lean team, so everyone's used to working at a certain pace. And we went from this pace to literally down here overnight, right? And so for the first time for me, I downed tools. I allowed myself time to spend with my daughter. I allowed myself to take a nap in the day. I allowed myself to start becoming purposeful about rest. I allowed myself to take a break, from the expectations, from all of that, which allowed me the grace to recharge and to start to see the next 10 years as pivotal as they are, but to see them with patience, I think. Would be the right word to describe what the shift has been for me. What my style of leadership would be daring, I would say. So, like Dirty Dancing, no one puts baby in the corner. I think, and when I, in hindsight now, reflect back upon our 12-year journey, as a business, we've been able to do some incredible things for the size of business that we are, and really crush some milestones. We were the first female Black-owned brand to launch in Harvey Nichols. We did it even before Rihanna. And before Rihanna came and blew us out the water, we had one of the most successful launches in Harvey Nichols. And then Rihanna came and made us look like absolute amateurs, with the machine she has behind her. But when I think about some of those milestones of being able to grow a luxury brand out of Africa into the first world, where there is, so many options and so much diversity, and to stand next to the best in the game with my tiny team out of Africa and a tiny team in London at the time, and compete at that level, it's humbling, but also sort of reinforces that, no dream is too big, and actually, if you can set your mind to it, I think, the mutual friend that introduced us together, I always say to her, you need to stop calling me when you need to expand your dreams, because at times I get scared, Then she goes, you're the only one I know who just goes for it, and who says, this is what I want to do, and this is, and you don't think about what you have or don't have, you just focus on the goal. And I think that's the thing that, I guess, boldly is the right word to kind of jump in, to jump in.
Yeah. So it's interesting because you're telling me about how daring you were and all the successes you've had, Rihanna or not.
Yeah.
And but one thing I found that we also have in common is that you certainly have more interests and activities than actually just leading the company. You do consulting, speaking, you launch the podcast, you write a column, you teach.
Yeah.
How does that all come together? And what you've just said about rest, because they don't go along very well, I have to say.
Oh no, I've been found out. So those things, so something that's come in this journey of owning Malay is all these other opportunities, all these fun things that I can do. I've taken up tennis, and I'm really serious about tennis. So I moved from London, and I moved out to the countryside in Surrey, and I'm surrounded by tennis everywhere, right? And so now I'm focused on playing tennis. I think with the same mindset, limitless, in anything really. Yes, it does present a challenge because I'm juggling, but I love the pace and I love the diversity. The thing I love so much about, guest lecturing at business schools is, you've got smart people on the other end. And actually, it helps me sharpen my tools, because to give them value, I have to immerse myself into the market. Writing the column gives me a chance to really shine the light on, a market a continent that I love, and I get to express that differently to doing it in my business, and it's less self-serving. It feels like service to this thing that I love. The consulting really is just because, people would go, how do I do this? And I realize, I get paid to teach university students this. I can help someone. I can really help someone navigate the early parts of their journey of, taking something from concept to something viable. I'm good at that. And then the speaking literally just was perchance. I started, I got invited to speak at something. Tell your story about being a startup. Someone saw me speak there, gave me an opportunity to do it again and again and again. And it's just kind of evolved over time. It didn't start off as being an actual career or an actual goal. And I think I'm all of these things, I'm okay being multi-hyphenated. And gone are the days where I felt confined. In the early days, I felt really confined to being Malay and all of Malay every day, all day. And as the business has grown up, right, the business is, a preteen now. It's no longer a toddler or a newborn baby that needs me every second. As the business has grown up, I'm also growing into being multi-hyphenated. And all of those things keep me well-rounded and bring value into the business as well.
Exactly. I might use pieces of your explanation when I get asked that question.
Yeah.
I love how it actually all grew in a very incremental way, because sometimes people think you wake up one day and you're just like doing all these things, but actually they all kind of make sense when they show up. And yes, they are this big thing now, but they do connect, and they actually were added over time. And it's not like you woke up one day with superhuman powers, I guess.
No, not at all. And they all don't always clash, right? So, I write one column every 2 months. One column every month. That's a few days of time in a month, which I can give. The guest lecturing, I take on hours as my schedule allows me to. So, and all of those things have come from being good or being really good at Malay. I wouldn't have had any of those opportunities if I wasn't good at Malay to begin with. I liken it to being, a music artist. They start off, singing their songs, and they get really good at singing that song. Then they get an acting gig, and then they get to become a producer. And they, because I was good at Malay, did these other opportunities come? And one of the things I teach, because I teach startup business strategies, is don't be afraid to allow yourself room to grow, because that room to grow can only add value to where you started. It's not negligible. It doesn't mean I do less or give less to Malay. Actually, it actually gives me a more rounded view, because I get to step away from Malay. I get to sometimes, I'll teach something, or the students will pose a thing, and I'll go, hold on a minute, I need to figure this out for myself in my own business, because that's not something we've sat and done. And being able to remove yourself from being in the business is also key, right? And sometimes we struggle with that as entrepreneurs. How do you, remove yourself and what you want and what you would want the customer to perceive versus what actually is, and how you can work from that.
Absolutely. So we've started going personal already, which I think it's also important that people get to know the person behind the business. And in the podcast, and we end up always also talking about that, about who the person is, mental health, how we manage, and how we find ways to grow as the individual that is not just the business. I think it would be a little bit weird that, even though we want to put it behind, for me not to ask about a little bit on the pandemic and how that hit you directly. You've mentioned you're in London. I probably have two curiosity questions. Did you start any new things, and what was it that you missed most on the day-to-day during times of lockdown?
Oh goodness, there's like 5 questions there, so I'll start answering them. My marriage broke down just before the pandemic hit, and my ex-husband and I separated 3 months before the pandemic, and then I moved out to the country. So the pandemic hit, and I'm a mum. I have a toddler. She's 3. So I have a girl child in all of her glory. Elsa, I sing Frozen probably 5 times a day. I role play doctors in between. She's very much and has been very much a part of my daily working life. And, I share that on Instagram, and I share that on social media, because I think it's important for working mums to also see that we're all doing it, right? And we're all navigating, balancing being mums, being career women, being family people. And so I moved out, and I chosen a new lifestyle for us because, I felt it suited us better. And then my parents came to visit 2 days before lockdown. So not only did I have myself and a toddler, I then had my 2 elderly parents who were of absolutely very little help, but just adults around the house because, and the blessing was I got to watch my daughter form a bond with her grandparents over an intensive 10-month period. I started the podcast in February before the pandemic, so a month before it hit. I got to just accept that I couldn't compartmentalize in the way that we're taught to compartmentalize ourselves, our lives, our work, our families. I couldn't successfully do that in that way. And so I just was. If I woke up and we were going to stay in our pajamas because we were loving being in our pajamas that day, I did. If I woke up and, we had such glorious weather over the summer. So, I would have the paddling pool out, I would have my daughter playing, and I would have, my iPad close by, and I would do what I could in between. It was stressful at times because you couldn't have super focused time, but I've always believed in getting help. I've never been one to go for, first prize in suffering, or first prize in being overworked or stretched. And so one of the early things that I did was looked at, in order for me to carry on doing all the things that I want to do, work-wise, and to continue to do the things that I enjoy, I need some help. I need some help with childcare. I need some help with basic time. There's something, I don't know if you guys have talked about this on the podcast yet, but time wealth. And it's such a huge conversation, and I think has been brought up even more so for working mums in the pandemic, because it's always been in the back burner and negated. And especially in the UK, there is reluctance to accepting help, in the culture, because you're supposed to be seen to be superwoman and superhuman. But I can say the only way that I'm able to do that is having the right support behind me that allows me to do that. And it allows me to be a better parent. I see a therapist every 2 weeks, always have done so for probably coming up to 4 years now, because I realize, in the same way, we go to the gym, we take up sport. As an entrepreneur, you're knocked down a lot. There's so many pressures and challenges that you face alongside just regular daily life that I realized the need to have someone hold my hand through it from a psychological and emotional perspective. Because, certain decisions, even things like when it's time to let a staff member go, or when the dynamic within the team isn't right. Those things have an emotional toll on you. We're still human. Little by little, those things mount up if you don't deal with them. And so, speaking of mental health, I saw my therapist through Zoom throughout the pandemic, because there were times where I had anxiety over, can I do this? Am I ever going to get over this threshold of pandemic and all the things I'm juggling? And just even parenting, parenting throws its own curveball at you. I'm just fresh off of 10 days isolating with a toddler, just her and me for 10 full days. That in itself.
Your face still shows when you talk about it, you're just like, you're still clearly getting over it.
Yeah. I'm triumphant through that. I love my daughter to bits, and it was a real test of our partnership. It was a real test of our bond, our relationship, to be content with each other for 10 days straight.
Yeah, and I think you bring up, I think we have talked quite a bit about mental health in the podcast, and It's something I do try and bring up because I probably try and get anyone I know to go see a therapist as they go see a physio, but I'm not hugely successful, but I'm still counting on the day that we'll all exchange contacts about the therapist the way we do about the osteopath.
Yeah, my advice usually is I don't care what method you use, just find the one that's right for you. Get one, because it really helps.
Yeah, I think the topic that is maybe less spoken of, and it's interesting you bring it up, is the help one. And again, I make no secrets about how much help I get. And I did grow up in a culture where that was very normal.
Same here.
So that makes a difference, right? Because both myself and my husband grew up with that being part of life. And so when we grew up to be able to afford it and to have high-powered careers, you're like, right, but you're going to do it with help, right? And so
but that's the only way you can do it. The reality is the only way you can sustain at that level is with help.
I don't think everyone feels the same. And I hear your point on culture, and some people have different support systems, and they may not formally call it help, but for us, that was in the pandemic. That was the fact we actually had someone living with us and alleviating some of the school homeschooling. And why don't we stop for a moment and say, knowing what you know today, you've been through a long entrepreneurship project that is a very successful project. You've been through many transformations, and so it's always hard to pinpoint where do you reflect upon. But let's just look at the last 2 years, because it's pretty common in terms of, everyone faced this storm, everyone in different boats, with different quality of boats, but everyone faced the storm. Looking back, would you give yourself different advice going back to those 2 days before lockdown?
I think I wish I enjoyed it more in the earlier months. I wish I leaned into what it was and didn't stress about it so much. The first few months I found really stressful, because I was still trying to fit into life as it was pre-pandemic, and I wish I had done what I'm doing now sooner, which is just lean back and just enjoy it for what it is. Even though, we were surrounded by a lot of grief, we were surrounded by so many emotions, we were being stretched in so many ways, there was no respite. I wish I sort of leaned back and I enjoyed it more in the earlier part of the pandemic. I did that towards the end, but I wish I did it earlier.
And what was your biggest lesson of the last 18 months?
We're stronger than we think, aren't we? We all are. We all are made of much stronger stuff than we ever could have possibly imagined. I didn't think if someone told me I would survive a pandemic. In my case, 80% of my revenue comes from sub-Saharan Africa and the hospitality industry, that I would survive 2 years pretty much without, sending out a decent invoice that I knew would touch side, and still have a business and not be bankrupt or any of those things. I would say they were telling a big fat lie. But to have been able to do that and just come out of it looking at my family in good health, looking at my daughter who's grown, through a pandemic and is still a beautiful human being. And I was able to do all of those things successfully. Gratitude would be the word.
2 final questions in short form. Is there a book you'd recommend to the audience?
I would say Malcolm Gladwell, David and Goliath.
Okay, we'll take that one. You can take another one if you really want to.
Goodness, a parenting book that I read over lockdown that I loved actually was the book I wish my parents had read.
And what would be one word you would use to look forward to 2022?
Be bold. What's the worst that can happen, right?
I think that's the word you're going to use to describe your legacy as well.
Thank you.
It's been an amazing pleasure to have you today. Congratulations on all that you've achieved.
Thank you.
And
Thank you so much.
I am very grateful to have you here today. And best of luck. I'm sure we're going to continue hearing about you.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I'm really grateful for having the time.
I mean, how amazing was that? Zeze had so much to share and so many insights that I just did not want to stop us going. From running a business to finding joy in your venture, finding yourself as an entrepreneur, as a person, we went through so much today. I am still absorbing all these great thoughts, but I'm going to leave today with Zeze's parting words. Be bold. What's the worst that can happen? Thank you for being here today. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. And if you did, be sure to drop me a review or share with a friend. Thank you, Alice Stansfield, for editing this podcast. And for today, I close, grateful for this journey. Until next time, I get to do this.